quick. We're going to go live, and we're going to see how this looks. So if April or somebody is watching, how does this look? How does this sound? Can we hear Heath? Can we hear me? Go ahead and talk, Heath.
Hello, how is everybody doing out there in live stream world?
In live stream, yeah, and I'm hoping, and what might also have to happen, and if this is the case, it's okay. I may end up having to throw my headphones on in case my mic is picking up both of our things. So let me see what we got going on here. Let's. All right. Okay. Can you hear both? Okay. Great. You can hear us both. Is there any overlap? Heath, go ahead and talk, and tell me when Heath is talking if there's any double. If you're hearing it come back and echo back through my mic.
Test, mic check. We're doing a test. Do we have echo? Any overlap? How's everything sounding with the audio out there? It sounds good to me.
Cool. All right, let's wait and see if we get a response in there. Also, Barb is great. She's from the UK, and she's been joining our live streams for a while. She's a ton of fun to talk to, so she's been great. She joins us sometimes on the thing. Okay, he is echoing. All right, so what that means is, hold on one second, guys. This is going to be okay. What that means is I'm going to pop on these gigantic monitor headphones. So that's okay. So hold on one second, guys. I'm going to have to run behind my computer real quick and plug these in, and then everything should be fine. So give me just 1 second. Heath, your comedy routine will work just fine. Go right ahead.
Oh, my comedy routine. I haven't practiced that one. I guess we need to keep testing this audio. How does everything sound? Is there still an echo? Or did he get his headphones plugged in yet? Let's see. I know I've done interviews where I had to wearing them for a long interview.
All right.
Very uncomfortable.
Okay. Oops.
Especially if you have glasses on. They become very uncomfortable.
All right. I think. Okay. Is Heath echoing now?
Hello. How is my voice sounding? Is the audio echoing? Are the headphones helping?
That's it. Yeah. It's okay. It happens sometimes because of how I have the setup. That when I do live streaming, if I have other audio coming in, it has that loop, that echo. But I think we're good now. Cool. All right. And let's see. Good. Sounds good. No echo. Just double checking here. Thank you everybody who's listening. This is a bit of a more complicated. I look like a glowing angel when close to the camera. Yeah, I have big lights in my little office here. These are huge box lights, so it probably makes my bald head shine substantially. All right, so okay, so I think, and let me just make sure I'm centered again real quick. Give me 1 second. All right, I think if I go right here. All right, I think we're good. Okay. Let's see. We've got the chat going. That's looking good. I've got my books here. We've got Heath here, which is great. So thankful. And I think we're just about ready. We'll start officially at 7. All right, let me just do some final checks here. Real quick, everybody who's watching, are we big enough in the screen? Is that coming through large enough, or do I need to make it a little bit bigger? I've already made it bigger. Okay, so it's good. All right, good. All right. Okay, we got that. Just good set there. Everything's running. I think we're pretty much ready to go. And I'm going to put my little notes over here, stuff I want to talk about. All right, and in 2 minutes, we'll go ahead and start. I'm going to grab a quick sip. Heath, one other thing. I don't know what happened, but my jaw, I did like injure my jaw or something. So I've had this tight muscle. And so if I start to get to a point where I'm having to do something like that to stretch it out, I may literally be like, just go ahead and talk, because this thing, it's like a TMJ thing, and it will literally lock my jaw up. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna try to kind of, keep it cool as best I can. But if it does start to get agitated, I might say less. Um,
I'll try to keep my eye open for that.
Thanks. Oh man, like I said, I've been so excited for this tonight. So
So is this the first time you're doing a interview?
it's the first time I'm doing one from my end. Yeah,
Okay.
from my end, it's the first time. So where I'm having to sort of run it and
Yeah, I've
and
never
and
done one from my end before.
do the setup. Yeah, So there's a couple ways to do it. I was going to originally do it on Google Meets, but then you had to pay premium for that, and I have a premium subscription to Zoom. So I said, okay, let me see if I can get Zoom to do it, and it's looking pretty good. On my end, it's looking pretty good. So I think Zoom worked pretty well, and then OBS obviously I'm running it through there. So all right, okay, I'm basically ready here. Just one more minute, and we'll go ahead and get started. Excuse me. I'll say this: the one guy who was there that had the really polite conversation with, he said he wouldn't be able to be here tonight, though. I was kind of sad. Yeah, I was kind of sad. I'm like, oh man, it'd be cool if he could make it, but he said he's gonna watch it afterwards, so maybe he'll make another comment. He'll throw some comments. All right, 7 o'clock. Let's go ahead and get started. This. Got this. All right. Well, welcome everyone tonight. I'm so excited to have everybody here with Heath Henning, who is the author of The Unbiblical Realm. So tonight we are going to be discussing Dr. Michael Heiser's work in his book, The Unseen Realm. And it's an absolute privilege to have Heath here. And we're doing this sort of in conjunction with Heath, with Spirit of Truth Church, and with Hartwell Divinity School. So this is kind of serving a number of different things are kind of coming together to present this. At Hartwell, our goal really is to present the best in conservative scholarship, and especially addressing areas and issues of heresies or issues of modern day theology that we deem needs some discussion to determine whether or not it's really things we should be believing or not. And so this episode, if you will, definitely serves in that vein. And it's what I've been looking forward to for a long time. I'd actually met Heath a while back and actually read another one of his books, which I will go ahead and get up, which was exceptional as well. Right here. See, Heath, I know where your books are. Mysticism Crept in Unawares, an exceptional book that covers things like Gnosticism, contemplative prayer, deification, a whole slew of different topics. Also very good. And so I'd already known him from this work, and then I read his Unbiblical Realm and thought, man, that he just knocked it out of the park. So with that, Heath, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself, let's have it.
All right. I don't know what actually to do to say to introduce myself. I wrote a few books. The other one that I haven't mentioned, or you didn't mention, is the one on the Islam. I'm not a Muslim because I read the Quran. More recent, I think that was just this year. But yeah, I guess I would introduce myself saying what I commonly say: I'm not a scholar. I just read a lot, and that's evident from my books as well. But I don't know. I guess my interest primarily has been historical apologetics, ancient literature,
Mhm.
and that's what really revolves around a lot of the Heiser issue. Is when I got introduced to his material, I essentially said, I've read this material and he's not accurately representing it.
Mm. Oh, okay.
So that was my big issue. And you could
Gotcha.
see that from how I handle a lot of the ancient literature throughout the book is because I'm trying to identify. He's dealing with his scholarship is supposed to be in this ancient literature. That's what supposedly gives him an edge on understanding the Bible, but he's misrepresenting that. And that's what I wanted to draw more emphatically. I mean, anyone can say, here's what the Bible says, and this is what's wrong with him. But most people critiquing his material, didn't handle the ancient literature that he deals with.
Mhm.
So I wanted to draw out that background, that cultural context, and his misrepresentation of that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I mean, as an introduction, I don't know. I got saved at the age of 19. Uh, I was an atheist before that. Actually, it was an introduction through reading a book on apologetics that said, wow, God does exist and he revealed himself through the Bible. So I started reading the Bible and got saved. Um, from that, I've served in multiple different ministries, addiction ministries. That was my background, what I was involved with. I work on campus ministries doing apologetics and evangelism on college campus, a local university. And now I'm kind of putting more focus on writing, YouTubing. I have my website, truthwatchers.com. And that's about what, summing up my last 20 years of as a Christian.
There you go. There you go. Well, and actually, I wanted to say I did appreciate your background in the ancient texts. I mean, the book, again, Unbiblical Realm, was chock full of discussion on those topics. And I'm hoping to dive into some of that tonight, for sure, when we hit that section where we really kind of get into what's actually going on with these ancient sources. So I'm very, very thankful for that piece of it. So let's go ahead and get started. So I had a previous a discussion where we kind of went through the basics of Heiser. So I want to actually jump in then with hermeneutics and methodology as a starting point. So what a lot of people don't realize who haven't necessarily been trained in theology is that before you actually get to theology, you have to have a method for doing it. You have to have a method for generating your theology, and you have to have a method for interpreting scripture. And Heiser does actually state at the beginning of his book roughly what his methodology is going to be, that he's then going to use to present his entire case for his theology. And so I want to go ahead and start out. I'll just go ahead and start out by a general, what's commonly accepted as the evangelical method of theology. And then we'll go ahead and talk. And Heath, I'll let you go ahead and start talking about Heiser's, how that differs from what Heiser views. And we'll have some conversation back and forth. So in general, an evangelical theological method holds the Bible as the source of truth. This is very important because it doesn't mean reason doesn't have a place. It doesn't mean tradition doesn't have a place. But it does mean that in terms of the raw data, in terms of the thing that we are examining, and because again, theology is a type of science in the traditional classical understanding, the thing under examination is Scripture itself. That's where the truth comes from, not from reason, not from tradition, not from anything else. It really does have to come from the Bible. Then you have reason. Reason is essentially used to assess our statements, our theological statements, that against the Scriptures. So we say, okay, the Scriptures are true. We're going to try and generate a theological statement that we think accurately describes it, and then we can use reason to cross-check that back. Tradition then would be where we codify well-tested theorems, if you will, or hypotheses or statements, theological statements about Scripture. And that's the thing that we pass on to other generations through discipleship. And then finally, experience. Experience is not something that plays into our theology as much as it is something that is understood by our theology. So we're very much assessing our experience by the theology and things we believe rather than being driven by experience. So Heath, would you agree that's a general rough understanding of the evangelical theological method?
Yes, and I actually appreciate your last comment about the experience. When I taught a course on hermeneutics in the past, that was one of my first rules, that scriptures define experience, and experience does not define our scriptures, our interpretation. Right. And I think a lot of people start with, that's ultimately where my book on mysticism was deriving from.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm glad you threw that one in there.
Cool. Well, go ahead and tell us roughly what do you think Heiser's theological method is, and then also he's going to make some comments about theology, creeds, and traditions. And so go ahead and wrap that in there too, and we'll kind of have a little back and forth, but go ahead and kick it off.
Yeah, ultimately, let me think. Heiser's hermeneutic method, probably a lot of theological positions hold this same method where they're kind of more circular reasoning, where they start with a theological system and then they're studying the Bible to try to proof text that system. Mm-hmm. That is common. It's not only Heiser, but Heiser's doing that. Mm-hmm. He's accusing everybody else that we're filtering our our understanding, our exegesis through tradition, but he's filtering his through what he calls the Deuteronomy 32 worldview, or his divine council worldview. So that is his theological system that he's defining. That is the filter. That is his hermeneutic method, is to justify this theological system. He admits to using allegorical interpretations. One of the things that he talks about is that God in the Old Testament particularly, and he's a Hebrew scholar, that's his scholarship, so he kind of has more of a focus on the Old Testament in his teachings. So his concept is that God used an encryptic message. It was a clouded message that, because he has this concept of this divine council, these evil gods that are out there trying to ruin God's plan or whatever, and they're rebelling against God. And so he had to make a secret encrypted message in the Old Testament so that these rebellious gods couldn't figure out what his plan was. And so by presenting a concept like that, he's justifying his method for allegorizing scriptures.
Yeah.
He's the one who got the keys to break this encrypted message, and he's breaking it down through a lot of allegorical interpretation. He identifies his premise because of his background in ancient literature. He says that he's the one with this ancient cultural context, a background to be able to interpret the Bible. Is interesting because that is his major thesis. I got this background of the understanding of this historical context. But at the same time, let me dig up a quote.
Sure.
All right. He says, okay, this quote shows up on page 40 of my book. And it is quoting Heiser's article. He actually published this in a Mormon theological journal by invitation.
Yeah.
They invited him to write this article.
Well, and there's reasons potentially for that, because and we'll get into that later, probably when we hit on his emendations to theology proper. But yeah, there's reasons why I think he probably did, and I think you probably agree with it. But go ahead.
Yeah. So the title is "You've Seen One God," or you've seen one Elohim, you've seen them all. He says, quote, and this is from page 240, 241 of that article, quote, "Other than the Malach Yahweh, Yehovah," he says Yahweh, the angels of Yahweh, there are no instances, wait, I'm on the wrong one. Oh, no, wait, I'm not on the right quote. There are no instances where the Malach is described as Elohim except in the mouth of a pagan king. And he references Daniel 3:25 through 28. And then the next statement he has, which cannot constitute a sound source of Israelite theology.
I remember reading that, and I'm like, really? Because isn't that exactly what you do with all of the other things you're bringing in? But go ahead.
Yeah, so everything he has, all right?
Yeah.
And I could ramble off the next 2 pages that I have a bunch of the comments that I make about this, but everything he says is based on going back to pagan literature.
Yeah.
To develop this theology system that he has to back it up. So like while he's saying terms or phrases from the mouth of this pagan king does not make sound Israelite theology, where do we get sound doctrine from Israelite theology? The Bible. All right.
That's what I would think.
Is the ancient literature of the Ugarit, these Canaanites, is that important for us? We learn a lot. It's relevant to learn this historical, cultural context, the background, but we don't take that to put it into our theology.
Yeah.
So his concept of this divine council revolves around the Ugaritic backdrop of you have the gods El and his wife Ashtaroth, and they have Baal and 70 other gods sitting at a council. And so he's referring to this as the sons of God. His concept is these, as Babel dispersion had 70 nations, these 70 gods from the Ugaritic myth are here actually reigning over these 70 nations, Gentile nations. And this is somehow competing against a region of Israel, and Jehovah is the God of Israel. And so it's this very pagan. If you even look at how the Bible represents some of the pagan kings, he's like, oh, when Assyria comes to attack Israel, and our gods are greater. We've defeated all these other nations' gods. Don't think your national God is going to beat us. We're greater, because we got a better God. And this is how Heiser projects his theology.
Mm-hmm.
But no, Israel's got the greatest God. They're going to win in the end. But all these other gods are rebelling against Jehovah. I use the word Jehovah. He uses the word Yahweh. Hopefully people don't get confused. If I read a quote, I'm not endorsing Yahweh is the proper pronunciation. But anyways, that is I wrote an article, and I'm going to expand it when I make corrections and do a second edition, an appendix of is his Deuteronomy 32 worldview a valid worldview, and just taking epistemology, what holds a sound worldview, and assessing his based on these criteria of sound worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a good example where it's inconsistent. He contradicts his own views, saying we don't get theology out of the mouth of a pagan, but his entire system is based on the literature of pagans.
Yeah.
And that is really the root fallacy of his entire hermeneutic system.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen people who attack me because they're Heiser fans and say, oh, I'm opposed to reading ancient literature. And it's like, where in the world did you get that?
No, again, if somebody read your book, I'd be like, no, there's clearly, he's read like almost every single one of these things. Yeah.
All of my articles on the website, too, is just, I use ancient literature very frequently. I don't have a problem with that. I think one of the weaknesses in Christianity today is the lack of familiarity with this ancient literature.
Okay, so on this point, I don't want to get too far off topic, but I do want to make a point on this. So, for example, when I was in my PhD in Liberty, I took biblical archaeology, had a phenomenal time. And we learned about the Sumerian Kings list. We learned about a lot of these different things. We had to read a number of these things. All of the different creation stories from all of the different things. We had to read all of this kind of stuff. We had to do comparisons. And here's the funny thing. The comment was, from a liberal perspective, because then we can get into this a little bit later too, but when I said, his reliance on liberal thinking and liberal theology, the comment was the mythological stories from the other civilizations clearly were legendizations, whereas the biblical story was essentially keeping it on the straight and narrow and was very down to earth, very cut and dry. Now, the point then would be that the biblical story accurately represents what happened. The other ones were essentially legendization events of the original story in some way, shape, or form. His conclusion is it's almost all of these, right? Kind of speak the truth about this. It's like the Bible and for a lot of this stuff. It's like, well, that's the backdrop. And what he really means by the backdrop is the truth. I think is the best that I could get it is that no. These other things have the truth in them. And so you get this syncretism type issue that comes about because it's not that stuff's not taught, and I would agree, at the lowest level church. It is in the seminaries, right? And even in conservative seminaries it's taught. I do agree, and this is why I love doing talks on biblical archaeology and on ancient things and stuff like that, ancient texts and stuff, is to show people, okay, here's what we actually have here. But just because you have these things doesn't mean you come to Heiser's conclusions. And I think that's a very key piece to understand is that we actually all have the same data, but he comes to vastly different conclusions because his methodology is what it is.
Yeah, and I'll just read another quote from him. This is from his book, Reversing Herming, page 37. Until very recently, the Mesopotamian backstory to Genesis 6, 1-4 was unknown to all but a handful of scholars. Without the knowledge of this backstory, interpreters fail to interpret Genesis 6, 1-4 in its own context. Well, what is its own context? The context is Genesis 6, not
That's right.
Mesopotamian backdrop.
That's right.
I mean, there's these mythologies, and the Bible's not teaching the mythology.
That's right.
It's teaching actual history.
Yeah.
And so, but that's how he utilizes this concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's probably important to also address where his thinking is stemming from, he is educated in liberal universities. First and foremost, I want to recognize that, and that's why it's just dumbfounded how much conservatives just swallowed him up and are excited about just a lot of this liberal theological views.
Well, on that note, as I was reading through, and I'm probably not going to grab a whole bunch right off the bat now, but as I was reading through, I was seeing who he was citing for certain things, especially when this would happen. Okay. So, and we should talk about this. It kind of gets into his rhetoric, the second phase, but we'll hit on it here. He'll say things like most scholars, many scholars. Okay. And then you go and you look, and having done a PhD on this stuff, I've read most of those guys. And so I'm like, oh no, that dude was extremely liberal. That guy he's not even a Christian. That guy fundamentally disagrees the Bible is even worth reading. I mean, these are some guys with some pretty negative views at times. People that I would, if I were citing them, which some of them I did have to cite in my own book, but I cited them as, this is what I disagree with, Yeah. And he's not. And actually, one of the ones that you point out was Litwa. And I was shocked. I was like, I wanted to know from your opinion, and this might be jumping the gun a little bit, because I know we want to say that. We may need to just say that for the resurrection part. But how much, maybe you could just answer some one sentence, how much of Litwa's, and don't worry, everybody's listening, we'll get to this later, of his theology on the resurrection do you think Heiser actually believed versus, how much into that do you think he actually was?
I think he was profoundly influenced by Litwa.
Okay, so that's not good. Yeah, that's really not good. All right, we'll jump into that later. But that was a little thing. All right, so we hit on ancient literatures, interpretive scripture, very good. We hit on liberal theology. Okay, so he's going to redefine words. That's another part of his methodology, and how he kind of tiptoes around being called a polytheist or a henotheist. When I read his book, I literally thought, surely he's going to say he's a henotheist. I just, reading it once through, I said, that seems to be what he's getting at. But he's redefining words. So if you could speak a little bit to that aspect and how he dodges what I will call accusations of certain negative theologies by his redefinition of words, specifically Elohim, as one of the key ones, which, when you look at the BDB, it is not what he says. That's for sure.
In the new lexicon, it is
not what he says. So yeah, go ahead. Jump into that. Have fun. Take it away.
All right. So let me explain first the backdrop of where he's coming from. As I mentioned earlier, and we were just discussing his liberal education. All right. In liberal theology, particularly Old Testament liberal scholarship, their view is that Israel's theology evolved out of polytheism.
Yeah.
So they started polytheistic and evolved out of that. Generally, their particular position is during the Babylonian captivity, they purged out the polytheistic views and became monotheistic. Heiser's doctoral dissertation was intending to refute this, but the way he refuted it was saying the divine plurality, a plural of gods, continued after the Babylonian captivity. We read about them in the Second Temple Jewish literature, and it is still continued into the New Testament, and it didn't get purged into the rabbinic period, which is like when the Mishnah was composed, basically after 70 AD when the temple was destroyed. That's his argument. His argument isn't saying Israel never was polytheistic. He's basically saying it continued to be. It continued to have this view of multiple gods. And that's how he's refuting this liberal view. All right. So understanding that concept, he wants to draw a distinction, a division of himself with these liberal theologians who are freely expressing the term polytheism or Elohim, and so on and so forth. So he's redefining these words to separate him from their stigma, I guess you can say. I'll tell you a personal story. I was doing an interview with another guy, and he had this guy, a big Heiserite apologist from Australia, calling, and he's like, I downloaded his bibliography, and it's like 2,000 books or titles or whatever, and all these critical commentaries, and I'm like, yeah, it's a bunch of liberal garbage. And he's like, why is it got to be garbage? I'm like, because it's liberal garbage.
Well, let's actually address that. If I don't mind, I want to pause you, because actually this is really important. Why is it garbage? Because their presuppositions are flawed. And here's one of the ones that Heiser holds to, and I saw this multiple times. He holds to it's not JEPD. I don't think he does JEPD fully, but it's redaction theory definitely.
Yeah.
It is a late dating of Scripture. Definitely, it is the idea that Scripture can be changed, it can be amended, it can be modified, pretty much for the entire duration. That it wasn't even fully formed. I think he even says until the exile period. And again, that is an extreme liberal view. And so when you take those types of views, you produce garbage. It's the whole garbage in, garbage out thing. So he hit on that aspect of it too, because there's a reason why World Bible Commentary, there are some things in it that are fine, but on the whole, World Bible Commentary is not where I go. Like, I don't know that, and I don't want to say that but I saw that quoted a number of times. I don't know that I saw the NAC New American Commentary quoted. I don't know that I saw the more what we consider classically conservative commentaries. I don't know that I saw any of that in my read, but I did see World Bible Commentary. I saw Anchor, the Anchor Bible Commentary, very liberal commentary. So, those are the things that I would see. And he even admitted himself, I couldn't find evangelicals who agreed with me.
Yeah.
So, all right, go ahead.
To my memory, and obviously there's a few years parted since I've studied Heiser, though I've been dealing with a lot of Heiserites, so it's somewhat fresh.
Sure.
But the only evangelical that I remember him ever referencing, and he made a big ado, like, hey, I'm quoting an evangelical.
Sure.
But it was John Walton.
Oh.
So, I mean, he got a number of issues.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different story. But that's the only evangelical I actually remember him ever referencing. And he was like, see, I got an evangelical on my side, and I don't remember what he quoted him for, but yeah. that was that. What are we talking about? Defining words?
Defining words, and also just his view on the Bible. It's not inerrancy. It's heavy redaction theory, heavy late dating on the writing of things. I would honestly wonder, like, how much of this do you think is actually even real? Like, it's weird because he holds a very late dating of everything. And he holds redaction, like it can be changed and that's not an issue. So, we talk about liberal garbage. It's produced with that presupposition in mind, that essentially the Bible's just another text anyway.
Yeah, he does have a theological view, and I'm trying to remember what the name is, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. But basically, it's moderate. He rejects JDP.
Yeah, that's what I thought. He did reject JEPD, yeah.
The view that he holds, I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but it's a moderate view where the final redaction was coming to close at 700 to 500 BC. Yeah. So he does say things like, Joshua or Deuteronomy was completed in Babylonian captivity. He does say that kind of thing. Yeah. And so actually a lot of Heiserites attacked me because I said he doesn't believe Moses actually wrote.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he does, right?
See, he uses these tricky terminologies. And
see, that's the problem. Yeah, there's the problem, right? It's hard to nail him down on stuff. Yeah.
So it's like, when the liberals talk about, there's a Johannine school, and so John didn't actually write this, but Johannine school wrote this, so it's in the spirit of John, so it's okay to say John did this because he probably taught this, and then the later disciples taught that. Kind of like a lot of our creeds come later, and they're named after an individual, but it's actually disciples that formulated the particular creed. Yeah. So he does stuff like that where the law of Moses and Moses said, but he doesn't actually imply that Moses wrote it with his hand, but he taught it and it came down. But he says, I can't remember. I wish I remember what the word is, but basically the theological view is around 700 to 500 AD, BC, was when the Bible was composed. So obviously Moses didn't write that.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of his fans were like, no, he says this, and it's like, but he says he can say Moses's law. He says he can say Moses said, but he's not implying that Moses actually wrote this, and he admits that. So you could he has a multiple part series on his blog about the JDP theories, and you could view all his positions and arguments for that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he definitely has a late date. His influence is obviously liberal views, and he takes a little bit more moderate than some of the liberals, but then again, holding a divine council throughout the 70 AD and beyond, that's obviously more liberal than the liberal view.
Yeah. Yeah.
the liberals are saying it got purged during the Babylonian captivity. He's going way beyond that.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's purposely ambiguous in his phrases,
Yeah.
and that's why I had a hard time. Like, I read his dissertation just trying to understand his view. I was writing on Psalm 1 thinking, oh, I know there's this angel view of Psalm 82. Derek Kinder takes that position, and some others. And I was like, well, I'm going to read. I know Heiser, somebody talked about Heiser to me. I know he wrote his dissertation on Psalm 82, this topic. So I'm going to read it, seeing if he can convince me the angel's view. When I read it, it's not angels.
It's not okay. So we're gonna get. That's the next thing we're gonna get into. But yeah.
Okay, so I'll save that for next.
We'll save that for that's the very next thing we're gonna get into. Is that? So that's the whole point. By the way, of the conversation is it's not angels.
Yeah.
We'll get into it in just a minute. But yeah, no, I agree with you. You're right on here. But this is the thing. It's the language. So I'm sitting here reading this, and like I said, I mean, I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure he's open theist. I'm pretty sure he might even be full Pelagian, and he doesn't say it. But I'm reading some of the things. I'm like, but that's very close to full Pelagianism in some of the things he was saying. I'm like, the little gods, which we'll get into, that's like henotheism, but he calls it monolatry. There's some other different terms. And again, my point is,
he admits to being monolatry.
Monolatry, yeah.
He later denies it. When I actually emailed him and asked him,
okay, this is good
to clarify, he said it's a good term, but it's not appropriate to represent God's ontology. So he denies all terms. He's basically saying there's no term that defines what his position is.
See, here's my point. You know, and I've read, when you do this stuff and you read all these, I'm sure you've encountered this too. There's two types of books you're going to read. You're going to read people who say what they mean, and they say it, not ashamed of it. They're just coming out and they're just saying it, you know? Mm-hmm. And then you're going to find people that continually hedge on everything. That use ambiguous terms, that use ambiguous language, that like to redefine things constantly. And it gets very frustrating. And, you know, people make it out to be, oh, it's just sophisticated. It's actually not sophisticated. It's evasive. Yeah. It's evasive, and it has to be called out. Because evasive language in scholarship is actually the death knell of scholarship. Because at that point, there's no idea to critique. The person puts themselves beyond critique when they talk in those vague terms, because you can't actually say or articulate what they believe. And I definitely got that feeling from this book, that there are multiple times where he did not want to say certain things, so he worked a way around it. But it's fairly clear, I think, what his actual views are, whether or not he's willing to share those on paper officially or not.
Yeah.
Directly.
And sometimes he slips up and says things more
bluntly,
clearly. Like if you, I never watched his YouTube when I was writing the book and doing the research, and then dealing with the Heiser. You go to watch his video. So I watched a handful of videos when they were telling me that I misrepresented him. And
sure.
He did slip up and say things more bluntly, like, oh, busted.
Yeah.
You know, I was suspicious, but now you're busted.
Yeah.
Going back to redefining words. All right. His word Elohim.
Yep.
He defines it, it's translated as God. All right.
Yeah.
And it can represent a large scope of things. Yeah. For example, in Psalms, 9, where it actually uses the word, but it's translated as angels based on the Septuagint and our English reading. It can represent, so it can be used for angels. It can be used for basically your judges, human judges.
Yeah, human judges.
And that would be my argument. His center theology revolves around Psalm 82, and he's saying the gods are actual gods, these smaller, inferior gods that Jehovah created. Traditionally, classically, we've all I shouldn't say we all, but we've held the view that these are human judges in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
All right. That is the view of gods in Psalm 82, and practically every lexicon you turn to is going to say that, no matter how liberal.
Yeah.
The lexicon is.
That's
they're
right.
going to say that.
Yeah.
So I'll read a few quotes of him redefining Elohim, and then when we talk about his polytheistic views or whatever he holds, I'll show how he's redefining that term as well. Perfect. But this is from Heiser's article Monotheism, and I think he actually published that in Liberty's Journal. I
think you're right on that. Yeah.
monotheism, polytheism, monolatry, or henotheism toward an assessment of the divine plurality in Hebrew Bible, Bulletin for Biblical Research, 2008. Anyways, page 30 in the footnote 63. In briefest terms, an Elohim is a being whose proper habitation, quote unquote, was considered the spirit world, quote unquote, and whose primary existence was a disembodied one, unquote. And then in his book, The Unseen Realm, page 29, quote, humans are also not by nature disembodied. The word Elohim is a place of residence term. Our home is the world of embodiment. Elohim by nature inhabit the spiritual world, unquote. So this, in general, draws, again, multitudes of contradictions within his theology. He does acknowledge that the word Elohim is applied to humans. He does acknowledge that. In his more popular level work, he says, sweeping generalization says it never is, but then in his dissertation, some of his more technical discussions, he admits that it is used for Moses and others, and even in the Bible. Secondly, if the word God, Elohim, is completely disembodiment, never takes on embodiment, that's what you get from these quotes. He obviously has to tweak that, because what did they do? They came down and took women and had these Nephilim offspring and yada, yada, yada. So they can take physical manifestations. Okay, when we recognize that, were they still gods when they take on physical manifestations? If we apply that logic further, let's go to Christology and the incarnation.
Yeah. And we're going to hit on that too, but yeah.
Okay. So maybe I'll just leave that as a teaser.
Resurrection, right? We're going to get into that piece of it too, but yeah, you've hit the point. Changing even that one word has downstream effects on a number of different theological systems, and there's a reason why no lexicon defines it that way, because it's actually not used that way. And I think that's kind of the big issue. Is this? Right. He's essentially arguing for a completely new way of looking at how that word is used in virtually every situation.
Yeah.
That it means something that literally, I don't know, is there anybody else who'd said that before? That I think he's like, it must have...
I had a Heiserite reference somebody else.
Okay, maybe like one of Christian or something.
And I don't remember who it was, but this Heiserite probably got the reference from one of Heiser's books, I would assume.
Sure. But again, it's not common at all. I mean, none of the major lexicons define it that way.
No, and I actually, in my study on the Elohim, I looked at every Hebrew lexicon I could get my hands on. I went to a local seminary library to get all the Hebrew lexicons. I didn't reference all of them that I put in my book, but more so the most popular ones like BDB, and the most technical ones like Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. All right, I looked in all of these lexicons. I went to Greek lexicons as well to see if there's any validity. I could not find one iota of evidence that he could actually be supported in that.
Yeah. Well, and literally, if you take that view on it, as he says, it's going to touch every aspect of your theology.
Yeah,
it really is, and it does. Yeah. And we're gonna hit that. All right, I want to take a pause real quick. I want to see. I've already seen some interesting. We'll call them interesting comments on the in the chat. April. All right, so April is the one who is moderating for us. Okay, so April's the one who's moderating for us. So if people are curious, when I'm going to ask her now, April, if you've seen a question that you think should get addressed at this point, something on methodology, something on hermeneutics, all of that kind of stuff. If you see something like that in there that you're like, ooh, this could be a good question, go ahead and post that now, and we'll take maybe one question. But try and pepper a couple questions throughout, and then we'll do some at the end here. But if there is one in here, I'll check and see, April, if you have any in there already. Let me just go ahead and look. All right. Any question, April, that's come up? Okay. I think this is a question right here. Heath, we'll ask you this one. Okay, what would you say to someone who says you don't have to go outside Jewish Christian material to get Heiser's material. For example, First Enoch. Okay, first of all, whoever posted that question initially, thank you so much. That's a great question. It's an excellent question. And that's the kind of thing we're looking for here. So thank you so much for that. Heath, go ahead and address that one, and then we'll move right along.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. What would you say to someone who says you don't have to go outside Jewish Christian material to get Heiser's theology? For example, First Enoch.
He's misrepresenting it.
Okay, go ahead. Jump in.
That's the bottom line. And as I mentioned earlier, I've read this ancient literature, and so when I read Heiser's material, the big thing that set my alarms off is his misrepresenting of this ancient literature.
So would you talk about first? So he's misrepresenting First Enoch. Is that the one? Okay.
First Enoch, all the Second Temple, the pseudepigrapha, Dead Sea Scrolls, all this stuff that he's referencing, Josephus, Philo, all the Second Temple Jewish literature, he's misrepresenting it.
Okay. Would you mind giving an example? And again, to the previous question, literally, I know what Heath is referring to. That's a solid chunk of the book where he dives in all these. So if you want the full rundown, get that. But Heath, would you be able to share just an example of that, just so we could kind of have something concrete to go off of?
Yeah,
anything in that category of misrepresentation would be great.
A good example is First Enoch is probably most famous for his treatment about the angels coming down, taking women, having the giant children, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
All right. Throughout the book of Enoch, they're angels. Throughout all ancient Jewish literature, throughout all the Christian literature, they're angels. I have a whole chapter documenting Second Temple literature, all these references, and the Ante-Nicene Fathers, all of their references. All right. It's a whole chapter, and probably there's like 200 footnotes just in that one chapter. All right. And they're always angels. Heiser is saying they're gods.
Yep.
That's just a misrepresentation. Yep. First Enoch is not talking about gods. And so Heiser is redefining terms and misrepresenting what it's actually saying.
And if I'm not mistaken, it's sort of like, here's something that talks about the story, and he'll often link that to one of maybe the Ugaritic myths, where maybe they are gods, and then essentially that pulls in and redefines or provides, in his words, I think he'd say more context. But essentially, it says angels here, but over here we see that they're gods, but that's now referring outside the biblical text. So I think that's one of the issues, right? Is that he tries to find these parallels and then almost merges them together. Would you agree?
Yes. In particular with that one, he's using a Mesopotamian backdrop that these were gods. Epkelu is technically. So he is not depending on First Enoch. He is actually depending on a Mesopotamian backdrop to interpret First Enoch and then applying it to the Bible.
Excellent.
So that is the issue. He's misrepresenting it, and he is going outside of Jewish and Christian literature to start with a presupposition and then forcing it into his interpretation of that Jewish literature.
Yeah, excellent answer. Thank you so much for that. Go ahead now. We're going to hop in. So let's get into this Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32, Divine Counsel Worldview. Now, we were talking earlier, Heath, and I said, I really feel like the title of the book should be different. And my comment was, it's not really recovering the supernatural worldview of the Bible, because saying that almost makes it sound like no one's ever had a supernatural worldview, or no one believes in supernatural things. And here's the thing. I mean, yes, there are some Christians who hold to a borderline full non-supernatural view. I do hear about that. But within evangelicalism, within conservatism, we've got other commentaries, one of which you mentioned, which I also happen to have. This one right here, which you mentioned in your book, John D. Sarfati, 7-day creationist guy, who also argues that the angels, humans, essentially giving birth to Nephilim is the case. And I found other commentaries that said, too, they're evangelical commentaries. But the key is, that's not what Heiser is teaching. And that, I think, is something we got to get into. There's a lot of supernatural things in a supernatural worldview that Christians believe. That conservative Christians, evangelical Christians belief in miracles, belief in the Holy Spirit providentially acting in the world, a number of different things. I mean, you've got Pentecostals, you've got charismatics, you've got all sorts of stuff, right? And then people can be conservatives, etc., and hold those views. This is something different. This is something different. Again, we've got different statements on demonic activity in the world of various kinds. But again, this is something different. This is not saying, oh, we're just trying to recover angels and demons. Oh, we're just trying to recover supernatural acts of God. That's not what this is. That's not what Heiser is. It's not what he's trying to do. I actually would argue that a better subtitle for the book would be recovering a henotheistic worldview. Essentially, because that is the major, I'll say it like this, theology proper change, is that rather than having God as your three separate ontologies, God, angels, and humans, you now have actually 5, I think. You'd have God, demigod, demigod, angels, and humans. You now have all of these other classes of divinity. And that's another word that you may want to comment on this section. He really stretches the term divinity and divine.
Yeah.
I mean, there are things he says are divine that I'm like, I would not ever attribute the word divine to any of those things. So that's something you talk about in this too. But with that, I just wanted to say that when we're arguing against Heiser's material, we're not arguing against supernatural worldview, despite what this book says. That's not what we're arguing against. Most of us have a supernatural worldview. What we're arguing against is whether or not other gods exist. And that's one of the pieces we're arguing against. So go ahead, Heath. Tell us about the Deuteronomy, what is it, 82? No, 32. Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32, worldview, the divine counsel. What is this whole thing? What's going on? Deliver it to us. Here we go.
In Deuteronomy 32, let me grab my Bible to quote it in case. This is verse 8 of the chapter. Basically, what he is doing is using his textual critical method. Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High divided the nations their inheritance, referring to the division at Babel, all right? Mm-hmm. The Gentile nations dispersed from Babel, that's when he's dividing the inheritance. When he separated the sons of Adam, there's all your descendants from Adam, they're separated across the world during the Babel dispersion. He set the bounds of the people according to the number of the children of Israel. So when Israel came into Egypt, there was 70 souls. And the nations, if you read the Table of Nations, Genesis chapter 10, you have 70 different names representing the divisions of these nations and so on and so forth. And so you have 70 nations, you have 70 children of Israel when they went into Egypt. His premise on that is he takes the Dead Sea Scroll. There's one manuscript from the Dead Sea Scrolls. He references two, and after writing my book, I'll have to do an appendix more on this topic. But there is only one. I did confirm that. And there is one which uses the phrase the sons of Elohim, the sons of God. All right. So he divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God. That's his whole premise. All right. So he takes, there's 70 nations, therefore there's 70 sons of God or 70 gods. He uses the phrase interchangeably. When we use traditionally sons of God, we immediately think angels or something. He just assumes deity. All right. And the reason is because he's going back to the Ugaritic myth. Mm-hmm. All right. Because, Israel went into Israel, and before Israel was in that land, they had the Ugaritic, the Canaanites, and their myth was you have El, Ashtaroth, Baal, 70 deities of this divine council. So he's making that connection. And so he's basing this concept, and this was a liberal view. The liberals have been saying this since. Oh, yeah. The Ugaritic texts were found in 1930s that he's utilizing for this, but the liberals were actually saying this before. Actually, Kabbalah has been saying this before. Yeah. Joseph Smith had said this in the 1800s. Yeah. All right, but this concept isn't new to him, but it is his liberal education that he's carrying over. So that's the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And his justification of that is the one Dead Sea Scroll manuscripts.
And let's pause right there to make this a lot of emphasis and very clear. The assumption is these sons of God are deity level gods.
Mm-hmm.
They are deity level gods. At this juncture, if that is true, or if that's what he's asserting, which he is asserting that, I mean, that's his main premise. I would argue, he has taken himself out of monotheism at that juncture. Even if they are demigods or whatever you want to call it, once you've got another deity class, now he says they're not omniscient, like this is his main comment. He says they're ontologically different. He says they're not omniscient, they're not omnipotent, they're not the all-powerful. But it's like, but they are gods. And so at that point, we've now crossed into a different type of theology proper. Thoughts on that?
Yes. All right. So let me get into this polytheism concept.
Sure.
All right. And he literally rejects the term monotheism. Mm-hmm. The reference I quoted earlier that Liberty published, that article rejected monotheism. He says we should not use that term to define biblical theology, Jewish Christian theology. He heavily depends on a text dictionary of deities and demons of the Bible. It's a very liberal dictionary. And this is interesting because Heiser uses the term divine plurality. Mm-hmm. He wants to use that instead of, say, polytheism. Well, what does polytheism mean? Poly is many. Theism is your belief in God or gods because there's many. All right. Divine plurality. What does that mean? A plurality means more than one or many.
Divine beings.
Divine beings. All right. Yeah. So he's saying the same thing. He's saying polytheism. In that book, Dictionary of Deities and Demons of the Bible, that under the entry on Elohim, because he uses this in practically everything he's wrote, he references this text. I looked it up to see how they define Elohim. He redefined Elohim, so I was curious how they defined it. Maybe he got it from there. No, actually, in that text, under the term Elohim, the dictionary defines it and uses it synonymously with the word polytheism in reference to Egyptian theology. And that is actually on page 355 for those who have that text or can search it. Also, that same dictionary on page 363, let me find my quote, says this, quote, only when the subordinate deities are degraded to angels created by God they serve can one speak of monotheism. So biblically, these are angels, so we can talk about monotheism.
That's right.
He rejects monotheism, so he's drawn a strict distinction behind what he calls gods and angels.
Okay.
And when he defines the word Elohim as angels, disembodied, everybody's like, well, that's a spiritual being, and so he could be defining angels. Frank Turek on his website had interviewed Heiser, and somebody wrote an article, and they were saying, oh, he kind of sounds Mormon, but on second thought, they came back, finished the book reviewing Unseen Realm. On second thought, if Elohim does mean disembodied, he's describing angels, and there's nothing wrong with his theology. No, he's very
not angels.
Yeah. And in fact, I have a whole chapter to focus on that.
Yeah. Well, and on that note, he is very clear. Actually, it's one of his most clear statements that they are not angels. This is gods. And his whole premise is revolved around it. I do want to pull this out. One of the things that I've seen people arguing, pro Heiser arguing for, is, well, no, he can be classified as Christian theology and things like that. And again, we do want to be careful with when we call somebody a pure heretic or heresy or something like that. But I think what people really do actually need to understand is this, is that within theological circles, within evangelicalism, for example, within Protestantism, even as a whole, you essentially have topics that you really don't touch. And the second you start to touch and tweak and modify those topics, you start getting the heresy or heretic label. And I want to mention this briefly. One of those topics is monotheism. Mm-hmm. If you start to touch the monotheism, if you start to touch Trinity, and you start to do major tweaks where you're now arguing monotheism really isn't the best word, Trinity really isn't the best word to describe this, that's going to put you outside of Christianity. if you start to say things like, you know, you start to pull out the atonement, and I know there are different views on the atonement. I'm very well aware of all the different views on the atonement, but I read one of his articles as well on penal substitutionary atonement, and here's what he says. He says, well, I don't want to get rid of penal substitutionary atonement, but I want to redefine the words in terms of context. I'm like, here we go again. You know, you're.
I don't think I read that article.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating one. It's very short. It's very short, but I wanted to get his views on the atonement because I was trying to kind of pin some stuff down very hard. But you know, this is the issue. You start touching the atonement. You start touching Christology, which we're going to get into in a little bit. You start touching theology proper, and you're not just having a slightly different view on it. You're saying monotheism isn't really the right word.
Mm.
At that point, sure, you could say you're biblical because everybody says they're biblical. Sure, you can say you've got the right theology because everybody says they got the right theology. But we've got to have some recognition that said person has now stepped outside of traditional orthodoxy. They've now stepped outside of that. You're not going to find in accepted Christian orthodoxy heno or polytheism or anything remotely close to the actual ontological existence of other gods. Now, you might find offsprings here and there. I'm not saying you won't. Not saying you won't find people throughout history who've argued these types of things. What I'm saying is, in the accepted body of knowledge of Christian tradition, and this is why he's so antagonistic, I think, to Christian tradition. He does not like it. He says it's a filter, and he says he's faithless, I think was his exact word. It's faithless to use a filter, faithless to use creeds and traditions. He doesn't like it because it basically says he's outside of the bounds. Yeah. He's outside the bounds. So anyway, I wanted to hit on that because I think that's a very important thing. When we talk about those types of terms, he is outside the bounds, especially on theology proper. He's way outside the bounds. Now, he's not Hinduistic in terms of, his theology is not purely Hinduistic, but polytheism you could apply that to it. Henotheism, you could absolutely apply that to this, So anyway, go ahead. I just wanted to throw that in there in terms of there's a reason why we say the things we're saying, that he's outside, because he is outside the generally accepted understanding of Christianity and what this is from a conservative perspective. I know liberal churches, they're going to deny the resurrection, they're going to deny scriptural integrity, they're going to deny authority, they're going to deny a whole bunch of things. But in terms of conservative Christianity, that is definitely outside the bounds.
And this topic of polytheism, him redefining it, all right, just like you redefine Elohim, this is one of the big things that all of his fans are really caught up on as a big issue for them to break this down.
Sure.
All right. So you touched on this before, just briefly, and I'm going to expound it a little bit and show some quotes to see his issues.
Please do.
He talks about these multiple gods. So what he's saying is God, Jehovah, he uses the name Yahweh, created these other gods. They're inferior to him.
Yep.
They're obviously not eternal because they're created, but at the same time, he says they were created before creation, which puts them outside of the time dimension.
I saw that too, and I was kind of like, what's... It gets hazy at times, and you're like, well, what's really going on here? Go ahead.
So, and then angels are below them. You got this tier system of these inferior gods. All right. So, but what he is saying is he's not polytheistic because God is ontologically unique.
Yeah. That's the claim. That's the claim.
Yeah. That when I emailed him, and his response was he denied the term he applied to his own view of the Bible in his dissertation, the monolatry.
Sorry.
So, as I mentioned before, the concept of polytheism does not, in the ancient world, they all had an ontologically unique God that created.
Yeah.
All of them.
Henotheism was more
not like all
the
these
view.
gods are equal.
Yeah.
That has never been how we use the term.
Yeah.
And so again, I'll quote the source he references often, Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible. This is from page 354. Quote, also, some gods are more, quote unquote, divine than others. Thus, Isis is said to surpass the other gods when it comes to divinity, unquote. All right. So this is the concept. You have gods that are greater than other gods. That's traditional polytheism. in my book, I go through a number of references from an Egyptian hymn, and I'll quote these real quick. These are found in ancient Near Eastern texts related to the Old Testament. It's a hymn to Amun-Ra. Quote, more distinguished in nature than any other god, referring to Ra, unquote. It says, jubilation to thee, Amun-Ra, who made the gods. So here you got this unique God who made other gods. It says, the Lord, referring to again to Ra, the Lord of the gods who gave commandments, and the gods came into being. So he's the creator of all the gods. Moreover, it says, Father of fathers of all the gods, who made what is and created what exists. Sovereign, life, prosperity, health, the chief of the gods. So here, Ra is the sovereign God who creates all the other gods and creation itself. Again, quote, the solitary sole one without his peer. So he's unique ontologically. The sole king, like the fluid of the gods, unquote. And on. I think I have another quote. Thou, referring to Ra, who has constructed thyself, so he's self-existing or self-originating maybe. Thou didst fashion thy body, a shaper who was himself not shaped, unique in his nature, passing eternity, the distant one. So here he's a unique, uncreated, ontologically distinct from the other gods that he created. Yeah. He's passing eternity, so he's eternal while the other gods are created. This is Egyptian theology.
Yeah.
And we all identify Egyptian theology as polytheistic. This is Heiser's theology.
Yeah, it's very similar. And on that note, when you get into the Babylonian cult as well, there's some very interesting parallels. And I know you're going to get into that, the whole Baal cycle and all that kind of stuff, and the two powers in heaven thing. There's, it's intriguing how he really starts to try to blend these things together on that note. But yeah, you're exactly right on that. Yeah.
So it's important to understand that that's how he's functioning. And a lot of people swallow this because there's a widespread ignorance about historical, not just the historical literature, but the history itself. You can read historians that are saying this. Heiser's the one who's saying, I'm not polytheistic because there's an ontologically unique God. And he created these other gods. Everybody, scholarship knows this. Okay, scholarship knows what he just described was polytheistic. A lot of common folks may not know that if they haven't studied history. You don't need to go to the primary sources to understand this, but that's any historian would represent this. And so I can't believe how many times Heiserites are repeating. Well, I do understand they're reading Heiser, and so they're regurgitating his arguments. But that's his argument to not be polytheistic. And that's what everyone is really wrapped up on. His definition of Elohim being disembodied, so it might mean angels, and he's not polytheistic because God is unique and ontologically distinct from the other gods. Those are the two primary issues of his redefining words that confuses everybody.
Yeah, and I see there's a question here. Oh, yeah, a question here on this. I just caught it, and I think it might be worth just addressing. The question is, if the gods are human rulers, why does Paul say we don't wrestle with flesh and blood? If the gods were other human rulers, we would wrestle with flesh and blood. I think the comment there is, again, we're not denying angels and demons.
Right.
That's actually the point, is we're not denying angels and demons. We're denying that other gods exist. That's the issue. And so this is the point of confusion. It's like, well, in that case, principalities and powers, etc. There's a demonic and angelic realm, no doubt about it. It's not other gods. And that is the core issue. Anything else you want to add to that one?
Don't pull that passage out of context.
Yeah, also there too,
Ephesians 6 is dealing with what it's talking about.
Yeah.
Why connect that to Psalm 82?
Yeah.
Okay.
Very true.
You got to justify that from context. that's what I'm going to say about that. You need to exegete both passages and justify why we would connect these as parallels.
Well, otherwise, it's simply proof texting, and I think actually, if we could address that, what is proof texting? Because a lot of people, I don't think necessarily understand exactly what that means. If you exegete a text in its context, and essentially also other texts talking about similar things, and I do mean again contextually similar things, and you build a biblical theology, that's one thing. A proof text is when you simply pull a text out of its context, or you pull a text as here's a one-off verse without anything else around it, and just say this is proof of my point. Right? And so, both people are using scripture. It's just how is one using scripture is the issue.
It's funny. I'll throw out a little history of why I ended up dealing with Heiser. When I wrote my first book, Corrupt and Unawares Mysticism, I thought, we kind of skim down on page numbers by proof texting. We do that.
Yeah.
We don't, every verse we reference, we exegete and explain and justify why we're proof texting.
Yeah.
We do this all the time.
Yeah.
And I thought, what I want to do is provide evidence of my exegetical and expository work.
Sure.
People who know me when I'm teaching in course, whatever, at church, at other people who know me personally and hear me teach, they're used to my expository work.
Sure.
But people who pick up a book or read my article, they don't know that because I'm not recording what I'm teaching in person.
Yeah.
So my intentions was originally to write a commentary on Psalm 1 and just elaborate an extensive, and in that I was going to write an excursus about Psalm 82 because I was connecting those sitting in the seat in Psalm 1:1 and this authority position, and how there is this correlation of judges that were wicked and blah blah blah. So my intentions was to show here's expository work. I do proof text. We all do for all our purposes to skim down, but there's a lot of expository work behind my proof texting, while other people may or may not. Hopefully they do, and that was my intention. So then I got sidetracked and wrote a book on Heiser because I was like, well, maybe I'm misunderstanding Psalm 82. Let me see if you can convince me of the angel's view, and found out he wasn't.
It was the angel's view. Yeah, exactly. No, you're exactly right on that. It's the bottom line is when and I think this is the issue with conversations. When I go to have a discussion with somebody on something, and they start throwing out sources and quotations and other things like that, and it's like, okay, we aren't engaging on a level of idea. You're just essentially throwing out these things which you believe are proof text for what you're doing, but you can't have a conversation on the level of proof text. You have a proof text to show you that you've at least hopefully done the work, but you can't have a conversation level there. And that's why whenever we have these types of things, we try to provide a lot more context when having these discussions, because we actually have to deal with the text or the different writings themselves, and not just a list of here's my proofs for my belief. It's like, well, let's actually address the validity of some of those, right? And that's why sometimes conversations can be hard to have, because people just say, oh, boom, this verse defeats you. And it's like, it actually doesn't, but is someone even willing to listen to why? It's an issue. All right, I want to go ahead for time's sake here. There's two more main things I think we really need to hit on. One of them is Christology. And I have a couple questions for you on this. And then the other one's resurrection and the gospel. So let's do Christology first. All right. Boy. At first I was going to give Heiser maybe functional kenotic theory. And then I was like, some of the way he defines Elohim, does that put him into ontological kenotic theory? And for those of you who don't know, functional kenotic theory is and I hold to neither. I actually do not hold to either of those two. I actually hold that he had the divine abilities, that he actually did exercise divine authority, whether or not we agree on this or not. But I hold that he actually did exercise divine authority, divine power on his own authority. And there are a number of verses that I would argue that where he literally says, power went out of me or came from me, or he says, you have heard it said to you, but I say to you. It's like he's talking from an authority, like as the authority in some of these situations. That it's not functional or ontological. Functional is at least accepted within, typically people would say, Orthodox Christianity. People disagree, obviously. I don't agree to it, but that's accepted. Ontological, though, is like dancing with outside, because at that point, you're basically saying, in some way, he's no longer really God at that point. Like, there was some divestiture of the divine nature. And there are people who do it, and we all kind of get a little iffy on it. Is he in that category? Because there are certain things, certain statements he makes, certain comments about being Elohim, being a disembodied spirit. So then what is Jesus when he comes? He's no longer disembodied. So does that mean he's no longer God? So like, what's going on here? Heath, help us understand what is dare you try? What is Heiser's view on Christology, and what's going on here? Help us peel back the onion here.
It's definitely confusing, and I wish he was alive so we could kind of
Be
corner
nice.
him, demand an actual answer.
Yeah.
And we did hint at this earlier. When we're defining Elohim, God, it means disembodied in his theological system. Okay, so when God, Jesus Christ, incarnate, when he becomes God, or when he becomes man, did he have to leave his divinity behind?
Yeah.
He is no longer disembodied, so does that mean he is no longer God?
Yeah.
And that is the question. The other option is from ancient Gnosticism, docetism,
Yeah.
which means he was just a phantom. He only appeared.
Yeah.
To look. And again, he uses this concept where here's these disembodied gods, but they can physically manifest and have contact with humans. So maybe he has some weird docetic idea where there was like a physical manifestation or something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What does it actually mean?
Yeah. Well, or even on this note, does he think? And again, here's the problem. It's tough to find. Would he argue, maybe, and maybe he does, and again, I mean, I've only read the one book, and I just wanted to have a conversation on that. I would wonder, what I'd love to ask him if I could, is do you view the incarnation similar to how you view the sons of God being able to mate with women?
Mm-hmm.
Is the taking on of the body the same thing there? And if not, what actually, honestly, what actually is different? I mean, in the sense that I suppose he would have to have been born in the one, but like in reality, like what actually is different there?
Yeah.
Does he have like what is his view on the incarnation in that sense? Does it actually substantively differ from these other gods becoming people? Like, yeah, it's a serious issue though. This is like you don't want your theological system to generate that question. That is not a good question for your theological system to have to respond to. That if you don't have a very clear response to that's one of those things, right? That can put you on the outside. Like these are issues that were resolved by 300, 350 AD. We had all of these Christological heresies pretty much resolved after a lot of very serious thinking, very serious contemplation. And it's not that it's wrong to raise a question. Like this is the development of theology and heresy is people raising questions, being allowed to raise the questions, being allowed to have these thoughts, talk about this stuff, and having it be judged and essentially assessed by the body, and then deemed either orthodox or not. Where it becomes a heresy, where it becomes a problem is, and it's a great Alistair McGrath, I think, wrote this book on heresy. I did a series on it a while back, and his comment was, it's when people hold on to these views after they have been rejected by the larger church. That's where it becomes a problem. That doesn't mean we can't think about this stuff, and that's why even with Heiser, I'm like, sure, Heiser, write the book, man. Go right ahead. Like, sure, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. But it seems like there's a lot of catastrophic aspects to his theology, especially potentially in this area of Christology. Thoughts on that?
You pretty much said it. I mean, it's the bottom line is he's either holding to a kenosis view, or he's holding to some weird docetic view.
Yeah.
Either way, he's really in the line with Gnosticism.
Yeah, it's fringe. It's pretty much riding the line, if not over. Yeah. All right. Go ahead. Do you want to add one thing?
I suppose we're probably going to talk about the resurrection next.
That's next. Yep. So right now I was going to start. So do you want to start?
Go ahead. What is your...
So all right, I'll throw a thought, and then I'd actually also, because I was having a very hard time with the gospel in Heiser. So, but let's do the resurrection first, and then we'll end on the gospel, and then we'll open it up to some other things. Let me see if there's one other question in here real quick. I'm trying to get a couple of these, throughout, just because there's going to be so many. Let's see if there's any ones that just kind of hit me here. I'm not seeing. Yeah, kind of addressed some of this stuff. Yeah. Yeah. We've kind of addressed some stuff. All right. April, if you see another good one, feel free and ping me, and I'll keep back. On the resurrection. Oh, could you review? Oh, sure. This is it. So we kind of already talked about this one, but I'll go ahead and just say it real quick. A henotheist is someone who there's this idea that there is one God who is superior to all of the other gods. So in other words, it's the worship of one God out of this wider category of gods. There's the proper true worship of this one God. Often that can take the form of that one God being ontologically superior to other ones, to the other gods. That's essentially what henotheism is. So, okay. So we never be. Okay, what would you say to someone? We'll do one more question on this before we hit resurrection. What would you say to someone saying we should never be afraid of using terms by the Bible in support of Heiser? I'm not quite sure what that exactly is asking.
Can you read it again?
Sure. What would you say to someone saying we should never be afraid of using defined terms by the Bible in support of Heiser? So I guess the comment there would be that the issue that we've been making, and I think the case that's made in his book is that terms by the Bible, sure, is that he's using biblical terms, but he's not using the agreed upon definitions. He's using definitions either that he's coming up with on his own or that he's getting from, again, Ugaritic sources, things like that. Did you have anything else you'd like to add to that?
That's pretty much it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always been a debate, and actually during the Puritans movement, there was a big. That's why people get mixed up about Newton, whether he was Arian or not.
Mm-hmm.
But they had a movement that said you call Bible things by Bible terms.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a lot of this Puritan concept. So there, Trinity is not in the Bible, so maybe we should use that. And we have a history of words that we've used that have developed that trimline, complex theological concepts. Trinity is a complex concept.
Yeah.
Do we want to sit there and every time, instead of using this simple word, try to explain it?
Explain the Trinity? No.
Instead,
yeah.
So again, there is an agreed upon definition for these words.
Yeah.
And this comes down through our historical theology.
Yeah.
And when you're redefining that, it becomes problematic for everyone else to understand you.
Yeah.
But two, for him at least, it becomes extremely problematic for a consistent logical system of his theology.
Yeah.
Like we talk about God, disembodiment. Now, how does that affect our understanding of the incarnation?
That's right.
That becomes a huge problem.
Yeah.
And so it'd be a lot better to just use our traditional definition.
Well, and I'll even say one more thing on this too. This idea of tradition. It bothers me. Heiser's comments on tradition. Mm-hmm. It really does. And now people are going to be upset. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of flare up from people when I say this, but it really feels like a 2-year-old saying, I don't like mommy and daddy's rules, and so I'm just going to believe what I want to believe. And yeah, I'm kind of comparing him to a 2-year-old, but here's the reason why. Because when he rejects tradition, he is rejecting virtually every major Christian scholar and theologian for 2,000 years. I mean, when you say, I think you should ignore tradition, which is what he says, it is faithless. Okay? I mean, that is, and I don't want to throw around the words, but it is arrogant to believe that that an individual now can simply say, I don't need any of it. I'm bucking the whole thing, and I'm just doing this myself. It's like there is no care or concern for the 2,000 years of stuff prior. And that's a problem. That's a problem. Because when we start to walk down that road, I'm not saying tradition's perfect. By no means. Obviously, I don't agree with all of Catholic tradition, but there's a lot of good stuff. But again, you're talking about the first couple hundred years of Christian history. What is that? It's Catholic history. There's a lot of good stuff in there. There's a lot of good early church fathers. There's a lot of good theologians that we like in terms of apologetics, even things like that come from the Catholic tradition. I don't agree with all of their theology. Obviously, I'm not a Catholic. But the point is I at least have a respect for what they've done and the reasons they've come about what they believe in, things like that. I can at least respect them as, there are theologians in these realms that are trying to think through these things. And I just get the feeling like he's very dismissive of church history, of church tradition, and of evangelicalism in particular, and the theological thoughts that go through there. And I just kind of wanted to get that off my chest, because it's one of those things where it's like, man, even people I disagree with, I still at least have some modicum of respect for the fact that they're trying, like even Heiser. I mean, sure. Like I said, I read his book. I wanted to know, prove the case, demonstrate your point. Do you have anything you want to add to that?
You use the word arrogant, and I would say that's really a good expression, because he's basically saying, for the first time in history, I'm the one who got it right.
I think he actually, maybe he doesn't say exactly, but yeah, he literally, it's like no one could have done this before now. I mean, it's kind of the feeling you get from it, right?
Yeah.
So
arrogance is I think that's definitely, and even when you see how he responds to people who have critiqued him, all right, there's definitely a proud haughtiness, mockery, towards
that's unfortunate.
people. And it's, and sadly, it comes across with a lot of his followers. They are very, and anyone who has criticized them has experienced this. And go ahead.
Funny enough, we did the thing 2 days ago, and one of the comments was, "How dare you criticize a dead person?" And I was telling you, I literally thought to myself, I'm like literally like 75 to 80% of the people I read are dead people. That's who I criticize. I mean, that's theology. It's like you criticize dead people. I mean, like I said, it's just what you do. But it's those kinds of comments that the things like that's not even engaging with the statements. That's just being mean spirited about it.
Right. Actually, when I published my book, I sent the back cover in to my friend who was designing the cover, and he emails me back and says, "You might want to rephrase this because he just passed away." I had it all in the present tense, so he passed away when the cover was being So, anyways, when I wanted to put it in the print, I debated over, should I do it or should I wait a few months? Because I'll just respect and actually.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah.
I talked to a number of people and asked what they thought and had both different answers. Well, anyways, I actually accidentally pushed the publish button when I was dealing with the issue, and so it ended up getting published immediately. It was 3 weeks or something after he passed away, 4 weeks or something.
That's kind of funny.
I thought it was going to give me the option to put a planned date,
delay it. Yeah. That's funny.
It didn't come through, and then I was like, oh, I think I just published it. And I wasn't meaning to. I was planning on waiting 3, 4, 5 months, I was debating about that. But that is an issue. And to say, how dare you criticize someone who died? Well, anytime we criticize like a Jehovah's Witness, their Arianism, rejecting the deity of Christ, we're actually criticizing
the theory.
We're criticizing Arius for his theories. False teaching. We're criticizing Charles Taze Russell, who started Jehovah's Witnesses, and other prophets, Judge Rutherford. The movement was. I mean, we're always criticizing dead people.
Yeah, that's what we do.
Mormonism, we're going to criticize Joseph Smith. I mean,
welcome to theology. Theology is criticizing dead people. That's what they say. What do you do in theology? You read a bunch of books by old dead people. That's what you do. It's kind of funny.
Reading dead people because you know where they stood when they died.
Yeah, they're not going to change their mind.
Authors, they're switching their mind left and right, and then it's like, oh, I did like quoting him, but now I shouldn't because he went off the deep end.
Yeah, it's kind of true though. It really is.
It is.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Yeah. Well, I guess a whole other thing.
And my focus is more historical apologetics, and so I deal with dead people.
Too true. Well, let's go ahead and hit the last two topics here, kind of topics together, because I think they really do need to be done together. The resurrection, the gospel. So we talked about this earlier. The problem is if he's got an odd view on the resurrection, on Christology, he might also have an odd view on the resurrection. And actually, you quoted him in here, and it was a great quote. And I have it in, and this is where it gets into the Litwa thing from the very beginning. But you quoted him in here, and essentially, I think if I remember correctly, your quote was something to this effect, quoting Heiser. was something like Heiser was essentially saying that in the Edenic state, people become like Elohim. But he was contrasting this to the embodied state here on this earth. And so that poses this interesting issue of, well, hold on a second. Do you not believe we're embodied in your Edenic state, which we get to in a second, whatever you want to say about that? Does he actually believe in a bodily resurrection? Was when I was looking through this, I was like, wait, I'm not entirely convinced he does believe in bodily resurrection. And that does tie into the gospel. So go ahead, give us some thoughts. Give us your thoughts on his views on the resurrection, what's going on there, problems, and how that then ties into the gospel.
This comes into, well, ultimately it ties into the gospel because a physical bodily resurrection is the gospel. And without, Norman Geisler wrote the book for the Resurrection back in the 80s. I think it was 89. So and even in that book, I think he was a little too nice, but he said it's a salvific issue. If you don't have a physical bodily resurrection, you cannot be saved.
Yeah. Well, and Paul, if I'm not mistaken here, Paul gets pretty hard on this.
Yeah.
And his comment is, if the dead aren't raised, and I'm just looking it up here real quick, then the faith is in vain.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
entirely.
There's a serious issue. 1 Corinthians 15. Like, if the dead aren't raised, your faith is in vain. It is a gospel issue. So go ahead, dive into that piece.
The chapter starts off 1 Corinthians 15. This is the gospel whereby you are saved.
Yep.
Right? And then the whole argument is a physical bodily resurrection. Mm-hmm. And outside of that, it's a false gospel. Yep. All right. So that's important to know. Heiser, this is connected to his doctrine of deification or theosis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I've watched other people who criticize Heiser on this doctrine. They always applied like Eastern Orthodoxy or something else. And what I'm arguing is that to understand his theosis doctrine, his deification doctrine, is Litwa. You have to read Litwa's book.
Here it is.
You just have to understand that's what he is utilizing.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anyways, his concept is, here's these rebellious. And so the rebellious divine council, they rebel. Psalm 82, they're judged, right? And then the idea is that believers are then deified to take their place. We become the new divine council because they get judged. All right. So the concept is that just as the Elohim means disembodiment, so the same thing is when we're deified, we become disembodied. And he uses that synonymously with the concept of resurrection. We are raised, we are resurrected, we are deified, we are glorified. These are all synonymous usage of the same meaning that he's using. And so deification or resurrection, glorification, means we become disembodiment in his theology.
Yeah, and that's the issue.
That's the issue both with us as believers, mm-hmm. if we're raised bodily, and historically this is very important to understand, but we're resurrected like Jesus Christ. So he's saying Jesus Christ's resurrection was not physical bodily resurrection. And that brings us back to the whole, did Christ not have, was he not God while he was incarnate?
Yeah.
Because at the resurrection, according to Heiser's theology, he becomes disembodied as a resurrected.
Yeah.
So this is the big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Big issue.
And this gets into the issue of Gnosticism.
Yes.
So the reason why people claim, and I would indeed claim, he has, again, whether you want to call somebody a full-on Gnostic, I mean, the point is, these are Gnostic categoried teachings. The second you walk off of, physical things are an important piece, right? Where it's disembodied is the best state. The second you go into that category, where you deny that the embodied state is the final state, is the state that you actually want to be in, you've walked in a Gnostic category. You've walked into spiritual is better than physical. And that is Gnosticism. That is Gnostic. There's no question. Does he hold to every single tenet of Gnosticism? No. But that specific one is absolutely Gnostic. There's no question about it. And so that's the key piece, because I think somebody was saying, well, it's not really Gnosticism. It's not Gnosticism. Like, but if he argues that there's no physical body in the resurrection, which is what it again seems based on the best reading we can get of him, that's what he's doing. Then yeah, that's a Gnostic belief, and he has Gnostic tendencies. And so this is where we have to start having serious conversations. You start talking about henotheism. You start talking about polytheism to an extent. You talk about Gnosticism. Where does the Christianity begin and where does it end? And here's where we have to get into our final piece of this conversation, the gospel. And try as I might, I sought for the gospel in this book. And I had a really hard time finding it. So I'm curious what you think. What does Heiser actually think the gospel is? Because I did look up an article he wrote, small one, didn't really give much, but on the atonement. And he was like, well, we still need to hold the penal substitutionary atonement, but we might need to redefine or rethink what penal and what substitutionary mean. Well, here we go. Go ahead, give me your thoughts. I'm curious here. I want to pick your brain on this.
Yeah, I do have the chapter on his understanding of sin, salvation, and the Savior, where it kind of delves into his understanding about this and how he's corrupted the whole theological concept. First and foremost, you got a wrong view of sin. You're going to have the wrong view of how you need to be forgiven, or what you need to be forgiven of, so on and so forth. This is all connected to, the central of Christianity. When I had done another interview with somebody else on this topic, of course, Heiser, his fans, Heiserites, here's his gospel. So I got a link to 2 different YouTube videos.
Okay.
Were the clearest presentation of the gospel, because I said I have not read anywhere where he gives a plain, clear gospel message.
I was looking for that and I couldn't find out. So what did he say in the videos? I'm curious. Do tell.
I did a whole critique and answered this guy about what this video is. He starts off with discussing how he came in contact with this Mormon and went out to dinner with this Mormon. And then he talks about somebody contacted him and asked if he was going to lose his salvation if he got remarried after a divorce. And he uses this to springboard into what he's going to preach the gospel. He then goes to, what was it, Naaman, who that is that Naaman? 2 Kings 5, when the leper general comes and gets killed by Elijah. And so he says, he asks permission. Hey, can I, when I'm leaning on the king in the temple of these false deities, is it okay if I bow? But I understand that Jehovah's the true God. And so he's like, yeah, Elijah said, that's fine. And so this was his answer to this Mormon. All right. This is streamlining his answer to the Mormon. He says, as long as you believe, how did he put it? If you believe what Christ said about himself, you are saved. The Mormon asks him bluntly at dinner, am I saved? We have different theological views. Am I saved? And he says, I think that hopefully I'm getting a verbatim quote here. If you believe what Christ says about himself, you're saved.
So there was no Jesus died for your sins. There was nothing like,
There's no repentance of your idolatry being a Mormon.
Yeah, nothing.
You know what I mean? Nothing. And he used this very oddity, ambiguous passage of this general going back, asking permission. Hey, I got to be with the king. Is it okay if I bow while he's worshiping this God? And he uses that to justify it, And he uses this other analogy that he used of this guy getting divorced and remarried. Am I going to lose my salvation if I get remarried? He uses this, and he goes through the whole message. It sounds very, very, very antinomian.
Yeah.
Very much. But he throws a little, tip of the hat to Romans 6:1. Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? God forbid. He doesn't quote it specifically, but he kind of tips a hat at the suggestion, just to say, I'm not teaching antinomianism, but the whole message sounds very antinomianism. Then the problem is that he actually is a very Arminianist. He believes you could lose your salvation.
I was wondering if he was full Pelagian.
There
were points in that book where I was like, shoot, dude, this is getting very close to full Pelagianism. Yeah. So yeah, and he's on the extreme. And I don't know what. I mean, again, hard to nail him down. But you're right, he's way further than even most Arminians would even argue is
Yes,
reasonable. He's way further over
one of the most
on that.
extreme views of Arminian, and he's nailing Jello to the wall.
Yeah,
But from what I can understand of him, and again, I wish I could, have him alive to just kind of corner him and
yeah,
give me a straight answer.
yeah.
I'm not going to accept ambiguity. I would love to have that opportunity. Um, but he seems to be expressing, hey, just as the divine council, these rebellious divine councils, they're destroyed in Psalm 82 because of their sin. And we are likewise, we are deified and we become the replacement divine council. But if we rebel, we can be destroyed still in eternity. And so
Yeah.
he uses in that video, he uses this phrase, faith loyalty.
Mm-hmm.
So in that video, he's given the gospel. It sounds very antinomian. Sounds like you don't have to repent of your idolatry. You could stay whatever religious view, just believe what Christ said about himself, whatever that means, and however that's going to be interpreted
Mm-hmm.
to this Mormon or whatever individual. And then he says faith loyalty. Okay, so you need to remain loyal to Jehovah throughout all eternity
Yeah.
because you could be destroyed at any moment.
See, that's something else that I got from this. I want to mention on that because you know what this sounds like? It's very similar to N.T. Wright's split justification that essentially, now he goes even takes it to all eternity, but there's this idea that, oh, you get saved, but then you have to remain in the covenant all the way up until the second judgment, so says N.T. Wright, and you could theoretically lose your salvation right up to the very end, even after you're dead. So, it's this whole idea of how are we even redefining security of a believer? How are we like all this kind of stuff? And again, I was also troubled by the lack of atonement language, by the lack of death for sins. Like, there was it was this emphasis on the becoming deified so much that I was wanting this other part. And again, I think the biggest takeaway to come away from Heiser with regard to the gospel is, at best, he doesn't preach a clear gospel. At best, at worst, he preaches something that would allow someone to continue in their damnation.
Mhm.
To continue in their damnation is what it seems like. Would you agree it's at least a decent assessment of it, given that we don't have all of the answers to some of the questions?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And from the, I'll dig up the link.
Yeah, send me the link. I'd like to listen to it just because.
It's probably like a 30-40 minute video.
That's
And
okay. I'll listen to it.
yeah, and I'll also send you what my comments was to this Heiser, right?
Oh, please do. Yeah, I'd like to read it.
Um, I just got to remember it was a comments in one of my videos about Heiser on YouTube. So I got to figure out which one it is. But
Yeah.
it was very eye opening that this was the clearest. Like if I was a Catholic background, I'm not.
Yeah.
But if that Mormon who went out to dinner with Heiser that day and asked him, "Am I saved?" and he gave this message,
Yeah.
a Catholic would have enough background theology to understand the grace. It was a good grace message.
Okay.
Good grace message.
Sure.
But it's kind of like, let me throw this out. Max Lucado.
Yeah.
All right. All of his books, whatever, 101 books he's published, they're all the same thing. He's beating the same drum over and over. You read one, you've read them all. Grace, 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 grace.
Mm-hmm.
But he is ordained as a Church of Christ. So he actually believes in baptismal regeneration.
He's Church of Christ. Interesting.
Yeah. So he teaches grace, 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 grace. But
yeah,
technically, that's not what he believes.
Yeah.
Theoretically, I should say, theoretically, he shouldn't believe that if he's Christ of Church. The Church of
Christ. Yeah, that's interesting.
So that it's the same thing with this message from Heiser. It was a great message for grace, 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 grace. Mm-hmm. Great message for grace. And if a Catholic heard that message, it might have clicked to them. Oh, okay, it's grace.
Sure.
That might have clicked for them, because they have enough background. But you say that to a Mormon,
Yeah.
And he says this comment in that video. I don't care if you're a Mormon, a Jehovah Witness, a Catholic, or a Baptist. I give you the same answer. It's
Okay.
you believe what Christ said about himself.
See, but here's the point though. Isn't that literally, I don't want to say a cop out, but it is. In
It
other
is.
words, it's like I'm not gonna give you. It's like withholding it. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna give you the gospel. As long as you believe what he says, you're good to go. It's like, well, why not just tell us what he says? Isn't that kind of our point? Is that we're supposed to be
Yeah.
ambassadors? That we're supposed to like proclaim the good news as well?
Yeah.
Anywho,
Yeah. If you have a presupposition, you don't get over that by saying that.
yeah,
You
exactly.
got to tell the Jehovah Witness. You got to tell that Mormon what Christ actually said about himself.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
The Catholic or the Baptist might have that background to get saved from a message of grace, but not everybody.
Not everybody. That's exactly right. So, all right. So with that, we'll do this. We'll do. Let me see if there's one other question here. Forgive me, misquoted it. Definition thing. Okay. There's one question here I want to hit, and then what we'll do is we'll do final thoughts. Heath, I want to get your final thoughts, and then here's the deal. There's 11 people viewing right now. Apparently, over 136 people viewed it throughout the talk, which is exciting. We're gonna open this up, but here's the deal. Normally, whenever I do talks, and people who have been in my channel know, I always invite people in for a Zoom call afterward. And it's been very nice. Honestly, I've met some wonderful people this way. It's been a ton of fun. It's been a great way to interact. But I reserve the right, if we do this, because I've seen some of the comments in the chats, this has got to be respectful, and this is still going to be moderated. In other words, people can ask a question, they'll get a response. It's not going to be back and forth 5, 6, 7, 8 times. it's people are going to get a question, then we're going to get to respond, etc. And I think it could be really fun. If, Heath, you have maybe 20 more minutes for something like that, would you like to do that? I probably should ask before I promise your time.
No, it's fine with me.
That'd be fine. Okay, cool. All right. Well, real quick, Heath, final thoughts. Go ahead and give them. Then I'll give my final thoughts. I'll post the link into this. I'll have to post, but I'll tell people don't jump. Well, no, I just won't let them in. That's all I'll do. I just won't let them in. Okay, right for that. Heath, final thoughts.
Final thoughts on Heiser.
Mm-hmm.
I think to sum it up, it's accurate to say he's outside of sound theology. He's outside of Christian.
I'd agree.
All right, plain and simple. I don't have a problem saying he's polytheistic. I don't have a problem comparing him to Gnosticism.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that he's a Valentinius Gnostic, but
yeah.
Gnosticism is like saying the word cult. There's a lot of different Gnostics.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different views of Gnosticism, and people need to understand that. So it's not just a sweeping generalization, but he has a lot of elements from the different sects of Gnosticism. And one of the major things, and my work on Crept in Unawares book deals with that the early church fathers definition. Today we have all these different definitions from scholars assessing Gnosticism. Mm-hmm. The early church fathers simply said they're taking pagan philosophies and intertwining it into the Bible.
Yeah.
And that was how they were coming up with these weird theological views.
Yeah.
They were allegorizing it to make their pagan presuppositions. And that's exactly what Heiser is doing. He mm-hmm. might not have the exact this view or that view of Gnosticism, but his hermeneutic method mm-hmm. is Gnostic, and his conclusions are very ambiguous, but mm-hmm. you can't say they're not Gnostic.
Yeah. Well, and right on that note, I mean, you're talking about multiple gods. You're talking about confusion on the deity of Christ. You're talking about confusion on the resurrection. You're talking about confusion on the gospel. After reading the book, it felt like there was, rather than clarity, there was just a lot more confusion mm-hmm. on all of these things.
Yeah. I think that's one of the major things is that it brings more confusion. And a lot of the Heiserites say that he's connected dots and made sense of the Bible for them.
Yeah, and people could say that. I mean, people feel that way. But I for me, it was just like this raised way more questions and way more issues than it answered.
I think also it's going to be on your level of knowledge about Bible. All
Yeah,
right. If you grew up in
that's true.
some wishy-washy church that
Yeah.
did more entertainment than anything, you're not going to have enough knowledge to, and then you're going to be, wow, this guy
Yeah.
was really impressive with his PhD and his knowledge of Hebrew and all these
Hmm.
ancient sources. And he finally, pinned it down for me, shed the light on what I never made sense of because all I heard was jokes from my pastor. You know what I mean? There's too much of that
Yeah.
shallow Christianity
Yeah.
today, so that there's not enough theological knowledge to most people identifying, and I'm going to say that identifying with
Yeah.
all the insinuations that we have around that word these days, that they're identifying as Christians.
And here'd be my final thought is I think you're exactly right. The problem is in general the quality of discipleship in our country is woefully inadequate. And that's one of the reasons why I like doing these videos. One of the reasons about our channel is the point of this is to try to raise the level of discipleship. It's to try to get people to actually critically think about these things as theologians think about these things rather than just reading a popular book and just buying into it. It becomes really important because I think people are more vulnerable to heresies nowadays than they've ever been before in the last couple hundred years. At least in the Protestant Reformation. I mean, you had the 1800s. There were some pretty big ones that came around then, but it's gotten to a point where it's like, man, it's just we're insaturated with this stuff, and people aren't fighting it off because they haven't been properly discipled. So, but anywho,
And historically, people read for entertainment.
Yeah.
All right. So you read a Puritan, John Owens.
Mhm.
You read Josephus. I mean, these are just, why use one adjective when 50 is good enough? They wrote to entertain people because that was entertainment.
Yeah.
People read for entertainment. Today, people don't read because they have whatever, YouTube and TV and video games and their iPhones and so on and so forth. There's too much distraction and entertainment, and people, have to have their music in their ears all the time. They don't sit down and read.
Yeah.
So in the past, people were more read than they are today.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, we sit down and read with our kids every single night for the thing, and that's the nice thing. I've enjoyed just we're big readers, books.
We don't have a TV in my house.
Yeah, there you go.
So my kids, I mean, we got computers. We can watch a video if we want. I got a projector. We could watch a video if we want. But we don't have a TV. My kids don't sit down and watch TV. In any given moment of the house, there's going to be something. I had to tell them, don't play the piano. I got an interview. There's no piano. There's someone, a bunch of people sitting around reading,
I know.
The doctors told us, it's great. Your kids are breaking bones.
Yeah. No,
they go outside and climb a tree and fall and break a bone, and the doctors are like, we don't see this often anymore.
You don't. I know. It's a shame. It's the same thing with my kids. It's like, it's funny, we're doing these interviews and I'm like, okay, Anna, you got to tell everybody we got to be quiet. So maybe we can do some reading again, or maybe something, because it's always active. But anyway. All right. Well, Heath, can I just say a big thank you, man, for taking this time and doing this. Thank you. Your book was exceptional. I loved it. I would recommend it to anybody who's read Heiser's book. Anybody who's read it, both Unbiblical Realm, also his new one, which I didn't even know you had. I don't know if you told me you had a new one out. I have to get it. And then wherever I put it, was it up here? Yeah. Where did it go? I had it right up there. Maybe I set it down. I might have set it down over here. Anyways, mysticism, crept in unawares. Oh, that's why. It was underneath it. I highly recommend any of your books. I think they're great. I love them. And thank you so much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure.
It was a joy for me, too.
Aw, thanks. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead. We're going to try this. We got 15 minutes. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post in the link. And what's going to happen is you can go ahead and join if you want to join. And I will not let you in yet. I'm going to close out the YouTube portion. Heath, stay in here because this is the Zoom call as well. So I'm just going to post that. And then after I've closed down the Zoom, then I will let people in. And again, remember, respectful. We'll probably do the little hand wave, and I'll call on people, the little hand thing in Zoom. I'll call on people to raise questions. And we'll probably do about 15 minutes or so, something like that, because it's getting late. But we'll hopefully have some fun there. Again, let me go ahead and post that right now. Give me 1 second here. I'm going to go ahead and post this. right now. All right. Copy invite link. Okay, here we go. So here it is. Oh, thank you. Thank you for the nice comments. I appreciate that. All right, there's the link. So here we go. I'm excited to have some people come in and chat. There's the link. And thank you again so much for joining us here, Heath. And thank you again, everyone listening, for joining us here for Spirit of Truth Church, also in partnership with Hartwell School of Divinity, or Divinity School. It's been an absolute pleasure and a fun conversation. I hope to do more of these in the future. This is really fun. And with that, have a wonderful night, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Okay, so